Okay, so today we're talking about rational exponents and roots. And what is a rational? Rational numbers can be written as a fraction. Oh, you guys are so smart. And what does a rational exponent look like? Well, that means that a rational number can be written as a fraction. So if it's an exponent, it must be an exponent that's a fraction. So things like 8 to the 2/3 all of a sudden become possible, and you'll be able to do that like that later. Okay, square roots and cubed roots. That square root of 16, did you know that if you've been writing it that way this whole time, you've been leaving off something? You didn't even know. There's actually a little 2 right here. That means square root. Because that they leave it off because, you know, when they're teaching it to you for the first time, it really doesn't matter because they're not going to teach you any other kind of roots. But now we need to teach you about other kinds of roots, like cubed roots, which are like this, or fourth roots, which are like that, or the fifth root of 16, which is like that. And you put the which root it is right there. So when you're teaching it to you before, there was only one kind of root, so they didn't need to put the 2 there. Okay? So now you know that really square roots are supposed to be written like that. And the square root of 16 is still 4. But you remember how when we did square root of 16, it really means what times what makes 16, right? And there's something else that works. What is it? Negative 4. If you do negative 4 times negative 4, that also makes 16. So your answer is really 4 and negative 4. But another one of those little fine points of math, if you have a square root sign like this big black sign here, that one means the principal square root, which is like the main square root, which is the positive one. So you're still okay to just say 4, because if it's got that sign, it's saying, I want the positive one. But if they write it out in words, what is the square root of 16? Then you really should give both answers. Okay, so the sign itself is defined as meaning only want the positive one. All right, so I'm just making sure you're mindful of the fact that square roots really there's 2 of them. But if you write this symbol, you only need the positive one. And you really should have a little 2 there. Well, that implies that there's sometimes a 3 there, and that's like a cube root, etc. Well, what does this have to do with exponents? It's because, you probably didn't know this either, you can write 16 in the square root of 16 by doing this. That means the square root of 16. Write that down in your notes. That's appropriate. That's worthy of your notes. 16 to the 1/2 means the square root of 16. So it's not too much of a stretch then to figure out what this means. 8 with a little 3, that must be cubed root of 8. The square root of 8 was what times what made that number. The cube root is what times what times what gives you that number. So in this case, it's 2. So the answer for this is 2. Now, let me ask you this. Would negative 2 work? No, because negative 2 times negative 2 is negative 2 would give you negative 8, and that's not what they asked. So this kind, you can't just assume, oh, it's got a positive and a negative version. That's only saved for things like squared or, what do you think? To the 4th, yep. If you do the 4th root of something, then the positive and negative thing will work. All right, so if I asked this question, what is the cubed root of negative 8? Normally it's been a problem to have a negative underneath the square root, but it's not here because it's what times what times what gives me negative 8. And something works. What is it? Negative 2 times negative 2 is positive 4 times negative 2 is negative 8, so it works. Okay, so it's not a problem to have a negative underneath the square root sign always. If you're doing a square root, then it's a problem. Or if you're doing a 4th root, then it's a problem. But if it's a cube root, not a problem. All right, and I told you that if you were going to write square root of 9, for instance, you'd do 9 to the 1/2. What about the cube root? What do you think? Cube root of 8. 8 to the 1/3. You got it. That's how you'd write cube root of 8. So what is the cube root of 8 again? Would negative 2 work or not? Nope. All right. How about the cubed root of negative 27? Well, first of all, I can write negative 27, and I'm putting parentheses around it because this is underneath a grouping symbol. A square root is a grouping symbol, and so it really needs a parentheses. And that's to the 1/3. That's the cube root of negative 27. That means what times what times what makes 27. Do you know what it is? 3 is what makes the 27. And to make it negative 27, I need negative 3. You are right. Because negative 3 times negative 3 times negative 3 is negative 27. All right. So, square roots and cubed roots, etc. If I'm solving x squared equals 81, you remember what I'd have to do? I'd have to do the square root, which really needs a little 2 there, and you didn't know it before. Doesn't have to have one. We assume it means the squared one. And then I do the square root of both sides, right? You remember this? And so x equals 9. Where did I do wrong? Remember? It could be. Anytime you do the square root of a variable, you're really supposed to do this, absolute value of x. So the absolute value of x equals 9. So then real x must be positive or negative 9. If I just go back to the original problem, see, there it is. It wouldn't negative 9 work? Remember, the x is like having a little parenthesis there. So it's like negative 9 squared. Yeah, that works. All right. So what does that mean about the new stuff? Well, anytime you see this, anything with a square root, even written that way, square root of a variable, then you know your answer better come out with a plus or minus. You know what I mean? Just like when we did the square root of this. If you're doing the square root of it with a power instead, you got to be careful that you include the absolute value part. All right, so if I was doing this and it was written as x to the 1/2 is equal to 81, that's the same exact problem. No, it's not. Sorry. If I had to solve a problem by using the 1/2 power. All right, you're going to understand that more in a second. When I want to solve this, another way to solve it that you haven't thought of yet is instead of doing the square root of both sides, I could put both sides to a power. What power would I put it to? The 1/2. And why does that work? Well, it's a square root, and a square root undoes squared. But also because, look, when I multiply these guys, what do I get? 1. And now I've got x to the 1 is equal to whatever that is. And that's the square root of 81, which is what? 9. And so x to the 1 is the same as x, isn't it? Equals 9. But it'd be really easy to forget that we did the square root here. And so that means it's really the absolute value of x is 9. So therefore x equals plus or minus 9. All right. I've been doing a lot of stuff. You need to see if you've absorbed what I have been saying. X to the 2/3, or sorry, 8 to the 2/3 can be written as a root. Which part of this is the root? The 3 or the 2? The 3. Remember how we said like 9 to the 1/2 was the square root, or 8 to the 1/3, that was a cube root? Well, 8 to the 2/3 is the same as 8 to the 1/3 to the 2. Remember how in exponents that if you have a power to a power, you're really multiplying these? So this means 1/3 times 2 means 2/3. So do you get that those are the same? Now why do I do it that way? Because you now know what 8 to the 1/3 is. Can't you do the inside of that in your head? What is 8 to the 1/3? 2. And then I just take and replace this with 2. And 2 squared is? So 8 to the 2/3 is 4. Now, if you don't believe me, take your calculator. Type in 8 to the power of parentheses. Don't forget parentheses around this power, otherwise it won't do it in the right order. 8 to the parentheses 2/3 power parentheses, and it should tell you 4. Here you go. Anybody else need a calculator? No. Oh, you have one? All right. We'll do the rest on our next video.